Welcome to Justice Trek. My name is Ted Kilvington, and this is an audio and video log that journeys through comic book history as I discuss individual comic book stories of Star Trek, the Justice Society, and the world's greatest superheroes, the Justice League of America. Justice Trek is the only show devoted to the entirety of these great comic book series, from the 1940 debut of the JSA, the launch of the JLA and Star Trek comic books in the 1960s, and right up to comics hot off today's shelves. This show will impact you in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, jeez. Hello, I'm Ted Kilvington. Welcome to Justice Trek. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about 1980s Star Trek #1 from Marvel Comics. This was the first of 3 chapters in Marvel Comics' adaptation of the 1979 film Star Trek: The Motion Picture. This story originally appeared, all 3 parts, in Marvel Super Special number 15, which was published on December 4th, 1979. And then they split it up into the separate issues for the regular size monthly Star Trek Marvel series. I actually first bought this series, Star Trek #1. Bought it when it was published in January of 1980. So definitely enjoyed it. I was 11. What did I know? But that copy didn't survive my teen years. I did probably my only comic purge ever at the time that basically once I turned 13, I got rid of a lot of my comics. Not all of them, but not a lot of them. That one did not survive to my teenage years. However, I did buy it off eBay a couple years ago. Interesting story. I ordered a set of classic Star Trek comics off of eBay. And a couple months went by, didn't get the package. And then eventually it showed up on my doorstep. This was during COVID. And it was a bunch of, there were some fragments of comics. Seriously, there were some Star Trek comics that were in shreds. There were a couple which were beaten up, but otherwise intact. But most of the box was filled with old copies of Famous Monsters of Filmland. None of them were collector's items, because they weren't in good shape. Some of them had big chunks missing. And of course, they were from the 80s, so not the prime collector stuff. I complained to eBay, but they didn't do anything about it. So it ended up that I just had to take the loss. Now, there's 2 possibilities. One is that those comics were sent to me properly by the seller, and something happened to them in transit. Well, the other possibility, of course, is that the seller sent me a crappy box. I don't know which one it is. All I know is I ordered Marvel Star Trek comics. I paid for Marvel Star Trek comics. I did not get Marvel Star Trek comics in that shipment. About a year or so later, I did order them again, and this time I got the complete set of the first run of Marvel Comics. And read it around that time, and read it again as I was preparing for this episode. So let's see. Also, I have another copy of the story from Marvel Comics Star Trek #1, 1980. It is in Eagle Moss Star Trek Graphic Novel Collection, Volume 13, which collects the first 7 issues of the original Marvel run. Also, quick reminder, before we get into this issue's story, Also available for your viewing and listening pleasure are our previous 3 episodes. Episode 1, where I covered JLA number 137 from 1976 with the historic first meeting of Superman and the original Captain Marvel, Shazam. There was episode 2, where I covered Star Trek number 1 from Gold Key Comics, published in July of 1967, which was the very first Star Trek Expanded Universe original story. So the first original story outside of the original TV series. And then there was episode 3, which contained a coverage of All-Star Comics number 3 from 1940, the first appearance of the Justice Society of America, the world's very first superhero team. The Gold Key series ran from 67 up until 79. It ended early, January, February of 79. Then this issue was published in January of 80. So if you include the Marvel Super Special from December, then there was roughly 10 months between the last Gold Key Star Trek comic and the first Marvel Star Trek comic. I don't know exactly why Gold Key lost the license, but it may have been, that it was up for bid and Marvel outbid it, which is entirely possible because of the movie. However, that I just don't know for certain. Let's see. All right, well, enough about Gold Key Star Trek. Let's talk about Marvel Star Trek. Their characters that appear in this first chapter of the adaptation are, in order of appearance, there's Mr. Spock, who was created by Gene Roddenberry. He first appeared in the pilot episode of Star Trek, The Cage, which was aired to NBC studio executives in February of 1965. The studio said, we kind of like the premise of, space explorers, but it's too much pondering on the existence of man and not enough action. Producer Gene Roddenberry, creator Gene Roddenberry, he took some time off. He retooled the concept, made a color version, and it reappeared or aired. The final approved version aired on NBC network television on September 8th, 1966. My cat is feeling her oats. She gets jealous of when I pay too much attention to you. So just remember that. She's not upset with me. She's jealous of you. This is just her way of acting out. In the first episode, The Man Trap, several characters appeared in that episode that also appear in this comic. Those are Rear Admiral James T. Kirk, Lieutenant Commander Nyota Uhura, Chief Petty Officer Janice Rand, Lieutenant Commander Hikaru Sulu, and Commander Dr. Leonard McCoy. Another character from this issue was Commander Montgomery Scott. He first appeared in episode 3 of the original series, Where No Man Has Gone Before, and that aired September 22nd, 1966. Another character, Lieutenant Pavel Chekhov, debuted on Season 2, Episode 1 of the original series, September 15th, 1967, and that episode was titled Amok Time. And there are 2 other characters that appear in this story that made their debut on December 7th, 1979's release of Star Trek The Motion Picture. Those 2 characters are Captain Willard Decker and Lieutenant Ilea. That's the only name she was given, Ilea. All of the characters are human except for Mr. Spock, who is half Vulcan, and Lieutenant Ilea, who is from the Deltan species. Pretty much humanoid, but played by actress Persis Khambatta. Very striking appearance, most notably because her head was bald. So, here is some background information on where Star Trek is at the time of Marvel Comics Star Trek number 1. These are the continuing voyages of the Starship Enterprise. The space vehicle was commissioned by Starfleet the military exploration branch of the interstellar organization of species known as the United Federation of Planets. The vessel was built in the year 2245. Naval Construction Contract 1701. The Enterprise's first captain was a human named Robert April, and he was succeeded in the year 2250 by a human named Christopher Pike. In the year 2264, Jim Kirk assumed the position of captain of the Enterprise. Kirk led the crew on a 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, and to boldly go where no human had gone before. These voyages were chronicled on the 1966 to 1969 television series Star Trek, which is often referred to as the original series to distinguish it from many of the other television series set in the Star Trek universe. These voyages are also chronicled in the 1973 to 1974 animated television series, also called Star Trek, which this series is often referred to as the animated series. In the year 2270, Kirk was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral, and he assumed the position of Chief of Starfleet Operations. Kirk was succeeded as captain of the Enterprise by a human officer named Willard Decker. Star Trek No. 1 was published January 1st, 1980 by Marvel Comics with a 40-cent cover price and an April cover date. The untitled story is 18 pages long, by Marv Wolfman, writer-editor, Dave Cockrum, pencil artist, Klaus Janson, ink artist, John Costanza, letterer, Marie Severin, colorist, and Jim Shooter and Rick Marshall, consulting editors. The issue is the first of 3 parts of the adaptation of the film Star Trek The Motion Picture, which had a story by Alan Dean Foster and Gene Roddenberry, and a screenplay by Robert Livingston. It is the year 2273. A powerful and mysterious phenomenon approaches Earth. A Klingon bird of prey warship intercepts the phenomenon, but is swiftly destroyed. On the planet Vulcan, former Starfleet officer Spock is engaged in the spiritual practice of Kolinar, when both he and his instructors are distracted by the psychic presence of this galactic phenomenon. On Earth, Starfleet is aware of the approaching phenomenon and has dispatched Admiral Kirk to take command of the Federation starship Enterprise. Arriving on board via shuttle due to the ship's transporters being offline, Kirk must notify the ship's captain, Will Decker, that he is being temporarily demoted to first officer. First, though, Kirk talks to the ship's engineer, Commander Scott, and informs him about their mission. Mr. Scott tells Admiral Kirk that the ship has not finished their refurbishment and is not fully prepared for any assignment. But Kirk replies that the Enterprise is the only Starfleet vessel within range. Kirk then goes to the bridge and is greeted by his former officers Uhura, Sulu, and Chekhov. Kirk locates Decker and informs Will of his temporary demotion, and now Commander Decker is not pleased. Chief Petty Officer Janice Wren attempts to beam up the remaining crew, including the Chief Science Officer and Chief Medical Officer, before the ship's launch, but the transporters are not yet operable, and the onboarding crew are all horribly killed. Admiral Kirk then briefs the crew about their mission before he is introduced to the ship's navigator, Lieutenant Ilea. She is from the planet Delta, and Kirk is told at that time about the romantic past between now Commander Decker and Lieutenant Ilea. And Lieutenant Ilea makes sure to inform now Captain Kirk about her vow of celibacy. With the transporters now restored to full operation, the ship beams aboard new draftee Chief Medical Officer, the formerly retired Commander Dr. Leonard McCoy. And then the Enterprise leaves Earth and travels to intercept the phenomenon. The ship attempts warp speed to reach the phenomenon before it gets too close to Earth, but an engine imbalance in the warp drive causes the ship to be sucked into a wormhole, along with a massive asteroid. In an attempt to destroy the asteroid before it impacts the Enterprise, Kirk orders phasers to destroy it, but Commander Decker countermands his captain and orders the asteroid destroyed with photon torpedoes instead. Decker then explains to Kirk that because of the Enterprise's redesign, the engine imbalance would cause the phasers to cut out, fail to destroy the asteroid, and then the asteroid would impact with the Enterprise, killing them all. The ship then stabilizes the warp drive and proceeds towards the Federation. The ship then stabilizes the warp drive and proceeds towards the Federation. My kitten has got me distracted. I apologize, folks. It's going to get through one paragraph and we'll take a break. The ship then stabilizes the warp drive and proceeds towards the phenomenon. When they encounter a Federation shuttle, when the shuttle lands in the ship's docking bay, we see that its only occupant is Mr. Spock. Okay, let's take a break. I'll see if I can get my kitten to calm down. Please click like, please click subscribe. I'm going to do the credits. After the credits, I'll tell you my thoughts about this issue.
If you have questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me on Twitter under the handle @JusticeTrek or via email at thejusticetrek@gmail.com. Be sure to include the word "the" at the beginning of the email address. For research purposes, I rely heavily on dc.fandom.com, memory-alpha.fandom.com, comicvine.gamespot.com, the Grand Comics database at comics.org, and Mike Voil's website, Mike's Amazing World of DC Comics, at dcindexes.com. The opinions expressed are solely those of the host and any participants. This podcast is not a commercial enterprise and does not make any money. All copyrights are held by their respective owners. The opening sequence was animated by Craig Smith of Phoenix Studios. The opening music is Dragon Slayer by the Makai Symphony. The closing music pieces are the Superman theme, composed by John Williams, and the Star Trek theme from the original series, composed by Alexander Courage. Both closing songs are performed by the Superhero Orchestra. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comments, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for sticking around. Let's get into my discussion of my thoughts of Star Trek #1. Let's see, the cover art was by Steve Laloha. Decent enough cover. Nice images of Kirk, Spock, Ilia, and the Enterprise, but not that exciting. The first page is technically a collage of images from all three parts of the adaptation. It's also a credit page. The images from this first page would be used more often to promote the Marvel Star Trek series than the cover image. I'm not sure why, but that's how they chose to do it. The scene where the Klingons encounter V'ger, this is the first time in comics where the Klingons have appeared with the redesigned ridges on their heads. None of the Klingons on this page look like actor Mark Lenard, but that casting detail may not have been provided to Marvel Comics. Then on the next page, we see long-haired Mr. Spock. Star Trek fan Dave Cockrum did a very good job of doing the likeness of, hippie Spock, or long-haired Spock. Long-haired does not equal hippie. I mean, it did 50 years ago, but it doesn't now. Let's see. Then we see Admiral Kirk at Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco. The mini shuttle that Kirk uses to fly to the Enterprise really looks odd. To me, it looks like a big escape pod. But since it was seen in the movie, the design can't be blamed on artist Dave Cockrum. On page 5, the inking on this page is too heavy and many of the details are obscured. I'll talk more about this later, but yeah, I don't think Klaus Jensen was a very good fit for the art team on this, well, any part of the series. Star Trek was, prior to the recent Paramount Plus series anyways, Star Trek was bright and hopeful. Klaus Jensen's work is dark and moody. There's a very good time and place for dark and moody. His inking on the comic Daredevil, for instance, was perfect. I can't imagine Frank Miller's Daredevil being as successful as it was without Klaus Jensen's inks. I also liked his inks on Frank Miller's Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. He did some other great inking work for both Marvel, DC, and other publishers. But to me, he just wasn't a good fit for Star Trek. Page 6, Kirk meets the bridge crew. So this is the first time in the story where we see Sulu, Uhura, and Chekhov. On page 7, we get our first appearance in this movie of Decker. Now, he is very understandably pissed at having been demoted. I mean, at the very least, Star Trek or Starfleet could have said, okay, you're still the rank of captain. You're just going to have to defer to the admiral on the ship. But for some reason, they wrote it up so that both Kirk and Decker were temporarily demoted. Yeah. I know when I was in the U.S. Air Force, there were plenty of times when senior officers would have to defer to other officers. For example, I was a medic, and certainly there might be a time when you'd have a doctor on scene, and then another doctor comes in and takes over. You know, the original doctor doesn't get demoted. He doesn't take a pay cut. He doesn't take any sort of consequence for being willing to yield to a superior officer. On page 8, this is where the doomed crew are teleported prematurely from Starfleet headquarters to the Enterprise transporter room. Okay, this scene did not make any sense. In all of Star Trek prior to this film, it was always shown that they had the technology to beam somebody from a working transporter station anywhere within transporter range. The destination did not have to be a working transporter station. So you could be on some primitive backwater world that had no technology. Doesn't matter. One working teleporting station on the ship could safely beam down the entire landing crew. So Starfleet should have been able to beam them up from Earth to the Enterprise. Yeah, the technology was there. And don't give me some explanation like, oh, well, actually, transporters can only work from space down to planets. They can't work from planets back up to space. No. I mean, if you can have the technology for transporters, you can find some way to get a signal from Earth to a ship or even a satellite to a ship. I just don't buy that. So certainly, if you're concerned about the integrity of the transporters, even if you're in a hurry, you could first beam, say, the new crew's luggage, their equipment, their duffel bags, whatever they use, have that beamed up first, and then if that's safe, then you can beam up the living beings. So I call foul on that. But of course, that was in the movie. So I mean, Wolfman included it here in the comic, but it's not his fault that the plot detail was used because he pretty much had to use it. Let's see. Page 9, the Enterprise is told that the phenomenon interpreted scans by other Starfleet operations and as hostile and destroyed the Epsilon 9 monitoring station. This is a key plot detail and it will come up later. Then on page 10, we have our first appearance of Lieutenant Ilea. As I mentioned before, actress Persis Khambatta was quite striking. I don't think that her character was captured very well on the comics page. Page 11. Now, Dr. McCoy was understandably angry at not only being drafted, I mean, that's bad enough, but then being teleported so soon after the earlier incident. Now, it's not explicitly stated, but McCoy may very well have been the first human to be beamed up to the Enterprise after the original incident or prior incident, which literally killed his predecessor, the person who was going to be the chief medical officer. So if it were me, I'd take my chances with a court martial before I would let myself be beamed up in such a manner. I will say, though, that civilian Dr. McCoy looks quite striking with his beard. On pages 12 and 13, we have a great two-page spread of the Enterprise flying past Earth's sun. Now, the dialogue in this issue was mostly taken from the screenplay. And, of course, the story was as well. And basically what writer Marv Wolfman had to do is he took the screenplay, he broke the story down into individual comic pages and panels. He decided which chunks of dialogue would go into each of those individual story panels. But there was one thing that he innovated on, and that is the captions. Comic books in 1980 were a lot more caption heavy than they are now in the year 2023. One comic, a recent comic that Marv Wolfman wrote, Man and Superman, I wrote it 5 years ago, but to great acclaim. But he mentioned in an article discussing his work on that story about how different the writing style is these days and how much he had to adapt the writing style of the late 20-teens from what he used to write in circa 1980. Back then, comics were still heavily influenced by the 1940s pulps, and remember, 1980 was closer to the pulps of 1940 than they are to 2023. Seems hard to believe that in the year 2023, we're closer to the year 2063 than we are to the year 1980. Do you feel old now? I know I do. But anyways, back to Marv Wolfman's contribution. What he did contribute to the script of the issue that was his was the captions. One of the things about comic books is they cannot fully, and at least in my opinion, they can't really convey music. That's the one thing I've never found a single comic that to me effectively conveyed music. And a lot of the times in film, music is used to set the scene. So you get scared because they're playing scary music. You get excited because they're playing exciting music. You think a romance is about to happen because they play lovey-dovey music. But you don't get that in a comic book. What you do get are captions where the book's writer will put in a few sentences trying to explain, maybe the character's thought process, explain the situation, and they'll often use very colorful prose in doing so. That's what Marv Wolfman did throughout the issue, but it was especially striking to me on this two-page spread for pages 12 and 13. The movie, of course, captured the majesty of the Starship Enterprise as it soared through the solar system. And Marv Wolfman had to capture that majesty in his script with his text boxes, his captions, and I thought he did a great job of it. Sorry, I have to keep checking the microphone to make sure it's on. I recorded this episode twice already, and the microphone kept cutting out on me. Let's see, blah, 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 blah. Okay, here's a sample of the prose that Wolfman wrote in this spread. There is thunder and majesty as the great starship swoops forward, leaving behind its dry dock home of the last 2 years. Amidst 100 separate orders, Kirk breathes deeply, relishing this long-awaited moment. This is where he was meant to be. This is what he was meant to do. All right. Page 14, another over-inked page. Page 15. As much as I disliked Klaus Jansson's inking, I loved Marie Severin's coloring, and to me, it was most evident on this page. It's throughout the issue, but this is the page that really makes it pop. And it's the same whether you look at the original edition or you look at the high-quality reprint edition. It really adds a lot to the issue. Let's see, page 16, when Willard Decker countermands James Kirk. Kirk was understandably upset at Kirk's assuming command, but he did act very appropriately, which Kirk mentions in the dialogue, because this is a situation where Kirk's orders would have gotten everyone killed. Now, that also kind of explains later on in the story what happens with Decker. So Decker's presence is integral to the story, but even though it's really as Star Trek always is, it's a Kirk and Spock show. Let's see, page 17. Commander Decker talks with Ilia. She tries to console him after his encounter with Kirk, but she also reminds him of their past relationship in which he left her without saying goodbye. And finally, on page 18, a now groomed Spock comes aboard. To me, the image was underwhelming. As a cliffhanger, it seemed kind of weak. Let's see, final thoughts. A decent issue, given what Mara Bulkman had to work with. Dave Cockrum, I thought, did an excellent job. I don't know if he actually was able to have seen the movie before he drew this issue. If not, he definitely did a great job. I would suspect that certainly some of the designs and movie stills had to have been provided to him, such as the shuttle design that I mentioned earlier. It was just too close to the film version for him to have somehow simultaneously come up with that design. It had to be the film design. We'll talk more about how my overall feelings of the film in our next episode, where I will cover both issues 2 and 3. I missed a week, and now I'm trying to get caught back up. It would certainly help if my microphone wouldn't keep cutting out on me, because I had to. That makes a total of. This is the 4th episode of Justice Trek, and I've actually recorded 8. Before them, the audio kept quitting on me. Maybe the microphone, the Bluetooth wasn't synced, or the portable microphone wasn't charged well enough. So let's get this finished before that runs out again. Got some feedback from our first 3 episodes. On YouTube, episode 2, Dragon King commented, and that was the episode where we covered 1967's Gold Key Star Trek #1. Dragon King, who is my son and occasional podcast co-host, Mike Wellman, he said, "Nice video. I love the bit with the cat. Interesting facts about the differences between the early show and the comics, and how you mentioned that the comic writer may not have even watched the original series when he wrote that first comic. Also, I didn't know that they called it a space vehicle originally and not a starship." Meanwhile, on Twitter, Ed Moore of Teal Productions retweeted the tweet on Twitter announcing the debut of Justice Trek Episode 3, where I covered 1940s All-Star Comics #3, the first appearance of the JSA. And Ed quote tweeted the announcement of our very first Justice Trek video, Episode 1, where I covered JLA 137 from 1976. In his quote tweet, Ed wrote, "This was absolutely delightful. Glad to have you back making comic book shows, Ted. Keep at it. Next pandemic be damned." Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, Ed, for your kind words. Well, at least you got one more episode out of me, Ed. We'll keep on trucking. So just remember, previous 3 episodes are available for your listening and viewing pleasure. Let's see. Oh, on our next episode, I will be covering 1959's The Brave and the Bold #28, with the first appearance of not only the Justice League of America. We will see the great film villain, Starro the Conqueror. And last, and very certainly least, the first appearance of Snapper Carr. Woo! Be here, be here, be here. And in the following episode, as I mentioned, we're going to cover parts 2 and 3 of the adaptation of the motion picture. So if you haven't already, please click like, please click subscribe, drop me a line on Twitter, drop me a line at thejusticetrek@gmail.com. You can catch us on Facebook. Search for the Justice Trek group, and you can comment on the posts there. You can join the group and comment if you would like. It's not just about me. It's a two-way street. I'm talking, but you're listening. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and keep on Justice Trekking.